Please welcome to the stage our next panel.
All right, we're back. So I want to introduce the both of you. Richard, I've known, I feel since 2008, when we were on this variety thing where they were talking about the future of Hollywood.
Yeah.
And you were at the time, I think you were CTO of Lucasfilm, right?
I was, yep.
And that was, I mean, you know, and then after that, you were at Amazon, now NVIDIA, now you run media and entertainment at NVIDIA, which is really salient and important to all the things that we were just talking about. And Emad, who's joined as an advisor as well as Rich, right, to the Render Network a year ago, I mean, you did the craziest thing I've ever seen, which was I remember thinking, wow, AI is going to be so transformative and powerful. And, you know, Midjourney was out, right, and you had these image generators, and then you open sourced Stable Diffusion. It changed everything. I mean, so many of the interesting tools we see today, like, you know, Kriya and so many others were built on the things you put out, and it exploded the entire tool set of what could be done. And you were really the pioneer of that, and you have such a deep knowledge of where this is going. I mean, you're the one that was cluing me in on world models being important, and you're have a pulse on so many different things. So it's my pleasure to welcome both of you here. And let's just start by, you know, maybe from each of you getting a sense of where you think the future of AI and generative media and entertainment itself is going. And I'll start with you, Richard.
Where is it going? I think we're going to see a lot more personalization, a lot more capability of having things done in real time. I think that the fear is going to eventually fade away, right? I think that's one of the big obstacles that people have right now is the fear of all this. And we can talk a little bit more about that as we get going. But I think where we're going to see it happen is it's going to become a tool that people use to tell stories. We're seeing it already. That's the thing that's going to push the fear away.
Yep.
Yeah, I think we're at this exciting takeoff period here. I was just chatting with Richard just a second ago. Did some calculations with a new DLSS upscaler on the 5090s. 90% of the pixels that you see on a screen are rendered. So it takes from 720 to 4K, and then 4 of the single frames are rendered. And then when you combine that with that Quake thing that you just showed, you can basically have fully 4K generated games probably in a year.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
A year goes by very quick.
Yeah, it goes by very quick. And the latest batch of Gen 4 Runway ML Kling 2 just came out today, Higgsfield, that you showed with the camera
I love
control.
the Higgs guys, yeah.
For me, it's been about this progress from creation, which are these models that just spit out stuff. And that's how we use ChatGPT and Stable Diffusions. To then control, and then finally composition. And it's learned almost all those things. So I think in the next few years, we can have real-time video games or holodeck-type experiences, which is going to be insane.
Yeah, well, I think that leads me to my next question, which is, you know, I was, you know, to this thread that I was having even with Carmack and Sweeney before my talk to get there. Is it going to be when, and Jess was saying, right, every pixel will be neurally rendered, right? Now, is that replacing ray tracing and traditional 3D rendering? Do we have enough context, is context window large enough in these models, for example, to make sure that you don't lose anything if you're going to a fully, you know, where you just have every asset as a 3D object like what I was showing? You know, because that's the thing that I need, and I think a lot of people want, and even what a video game would need. How close are we, do you guys think, to having that where it could be done all neurally versus having to mix that over to, let's say, a 3D base model that you then do neural filtering on top of?
Yeah, so I mean, like, let's take the Switch 2, for example, coming out in a couple of months. It uses NVIDIA technology to upscale so that you can have on a low wattage this incredibly high definition output, right? And I think that that's where the future is likely to be, a combination of these two. Because the control factors of the AI models aren't quite there. And what really matters is what's the installed base. Like, everyone here has probably got an NVIDIA or similar GPU, right? If you can build to that technology and combine the two types of technology, I think that's where things get really interesting. But then you can use the very large mega chips as well and the solutions of lots of chips internally in a home to have the higher end experiences. So it's just, what level of accuracy do I want? Do I want to have the Blackwell or Vera Rubins generating entire worlds live? Or do I want to have my 5090 generating a more personalized but less high definition experience?
Or something streamed to your mobile device at the same time, in between.
Which is what we do for the Brownberg archive, those bridges and everything. It's just way too complex to even download and run, so it's streamed live off of NVIDIA GPUs, in fact. Although we can do it. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think this is the interesting thing, right? Because you'll have hybridized experiences.
Yes.
So you don't need to render in full like you can have all the logic of world interactions done in the cloud on the physics-based engines, the world models, but then it transports in very low resolution and then gets upscaled, but intelligently on your edge devices.
Yeah. And you know, I think those are all, I mean, certainly cloud rendering and streaming is something that we've been, I mean, I've been working on for decades, but I do think that for me, it's more, regardless of what device it's run on, what I want to understand is there a place where we actually are, there's an underlying 3D scene graph, because you want that. Like, you want to be able to even store, like, if you're going through a world, is the AI, you know, can we count it as remember and not hallucinate? And, I mean, all these world models that we're seeing have some of the same problems that video models do, which is that something goes out of frame and it forgets it. And that's what I'm saying, like the memory window needs to be really good, or you need to have RAG, right, where you retrieve the data that's stored. And I think that maybe the simpler intermediate step is we render something in 3D, even if it's just, you know, GRUD shaded or something, and then you drive the neural render on top of that. But I'm not sure myself. That's why, you know, it's so great to have your guys' input on these things.
Well, I think if you look at the Tom and Jerry thing,
Yeah.
it generates 1 minute long videos. What it did is it generated a language model and image model live from one model to the other. And I think if any of you remember the whole facial avatar thing that was built in Stable Diffusion, what happened is that you had a little mini model trained on top of Stable Diffusion that represented your face, and then you became an astronaut or a pirate. And I think you'll have these massive personalized models on the edge that then interact with these big world models in the cloud and different layers in between to have that personalization and that consistency. And this is how OpenAI is doing their memory feature that you've just seen. It's how Apple Intelligence works as well, with a base model and then these variants on top of it.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the Tom and Jerry piece was another, it's something that I think we should maybe touch on, which is, you know, test time compute, right? Which is the sort of the piece that allows it to basically, again, sort of do a lot more complexity within a single pass. I don't know, Mike, do you want to take a stab at like how you think that plays out in the future? Is that going to be something more essential to all these types of models? I mean, you want that kind of understanding. Like the reason why ChatGPT's image renderer is so good is that it absolutely understands what it's doing in that image. It's not just prompt to image, right?
Well, I think when you look at where you started OTOY and Octane and everything, you had these long sequential periods of compute where the more compute you provided, the better the render quality, right?
Right.
Then we moved into this generative AI thing where you had NVIDIA's massive, great supercomputers that compressed down into these models, but the input-output was very quick. We didn't figure out how to extend it, so more compute didn't give you better results. The latest paradigm, this test time compute one, the DeepSeeks of the world, and now it's being in media as well, means that the longer we give it to think, the more compute sequential, which is what makes it suitable for things like the render network where you can distribute, the better the quality output will be. And again, you've seen OpenAI's CEO, Sam Altman, and others actually say this, that the next paradigm is this distributed sequential paradigm, especially for generating those end assets. So I think it's a super exciting time. And again, I think NVIDIA are building towards that with the whole suite that you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the personalization aspect of what the experience will be for the game player, for the creators and such, you're going to have the ability to have the game evolve as you're playing it. It'll learn what you're liking, what you don't like, certain maneuvers and things like that, and it'll start to create that on the fly for you. And just think that what that's going to mean for your experience, whether it's a Switch or other devices, and being able to have that immersive experience that's unique to you and the way you play and what you like, and you and I might be in the same exact game, but experiencing it differently.
Yeah, I think the paradigm of this asynchronous experience is a very interesting one as well. So we have this game playing, but what if your game could think about everything that you've done when you're not playing it? And then it continues to build the world around that. And then we can have a mesh of networks. I mean, that is the most interesting thing.
That is the holodeck.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I want to talk a little bit, about Hollywood and use of AI in production that you're seeing, because you're, connected to all these pieces. You're also, I think, working with the Runway guys, and even Runway. I mean, what I love about Runway is that Christopher is positioning it as an art, an studio, an art studio, almost more than an AI company. Yeah. And I do think that, again, thinking about AI and its impact as artists, as content creators, as telling human stories is very important. But you're also seeing people that are, I mean, there's just a lot of pushback. Like Paramount at South by Southwest gave this presentation, their CTO, and it was like, people went crazy. And I remember your reaction, I think, to me was that, well, people are using AI everywhere in production. They just don't talk about it. You want to maybe touch on that a little bit and share what you...
Yeah, I think that, well, first of all, AI in the film industry has been around for decades, right? De-aging, digital twins, all of those kinds of things.
We've been doing a lot of that, in fact.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's only recently where there's been I think, an uninformed perception of, wait, you're taking artists' time away because that image was created with a prompt. And they're not realizing that it's a tool. And you can look at historical innovations in technology, even back to when film was created. You know, there was a famous article in the London Times in 2013 about how film was going to kill theater, and all of the uproar around that. And you know, fast forward to the late 70s with sampling. I think when people come out and they say this is a bad thing, they're saying it because it's from a point of somewhat being ignorant to what the tool is actually meant to do. It's meant to help you tell a story. And if the story is what you're after, then that's the art that you're creating. And if the tools that help you do that are a sample or a photograph that gets manipulated or a generative art piece that's from a prompt, your output is the story. And I think that what Hollywood got really scared about recently is when people saw generative art from a prompt and they didn't understand that it was a tool destined for a storyteller. And so the uproar became, okay, we don't want people protesting, we don't want all of this uproar. So then the studio stopped talking about it, which I thought was really funny because they've been using it for so long, but nobody wanted to talk about it because they were afraid of somebody that didn't understand it, rather than say, come to our studio and talk to us. The best way that we can all get through all this fear is to listen to the other side and understand and explain to them what we're doing. Like in the case of Runway, what I like about them so much is that they're about the art. They're not about, the technology is a means to their art. And like, you know, in my off time, I use it making music videos for friends' bands and things like that. And they'll listen to the feedback and they'll want to understand, why is it not doing what you want to do? Tell me about the workflow that you're doing. They're not trying to tell me you're not prompting right.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not technology for technology's sake. It's technology for a means to an end, which is, again, in that case, telling the story of a video, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was going to also just follow up. I mean, you're head of media and entertainment, or GM at Media and Entertainment at NVIDIA. What is NVIDIA's vision for their role in filmmaking?
Well, we believe that there's so much that happens like behind the screen and in front of the screen. Everybody's seeing all the stuff in front of the screen with all the imagery stuff that I talked about. But there's a lot of things that happen behind the screen that AI is helping to reduce cost, helping to democratize the tool set so more people have the ability to tell stories. And our belief is that's all a great thing. We want to continue to see that. We love what you guys are doing, helping people have access to powerful computers through a network instead of having to try to go buy time on something because an individual may not be able to afford that. But they have a story to tell, right? So our belief is, you know, we have an initiative we kicked off recently called Media 2, which is really about bringing AI to all facets of the media workflows. Not just the stuff you see on the screen, but how can we help it be more cost-effective, more distributed, more accessible for students to understand the filmmaking process and things like that. So there's a whole, you know, to say what is our view of it? Our view is it's the best thing happening in the industry right now because it's going to allow more content to be created and more people to tell the stories to get that content out.
Yeah, yeah. And this, you know, speaking of distributed computing, I mean, I would love to get your thoughts. I mean, we've talked, you know, between us about centralized versus decentralized, and I think you've been so eloquent, and even to me, right, about the you know, the value of DPIN and you know, doing it in this way, and you were just talking about the things that are trending towards that. You want to talk a little bit about how you see that playing out over time in terms of like, where does Render Network fit in the future? Are we still going to be doing this massive centralized training? Like, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that, you know, in crypto, there's this concept of not your keys, not your crypto. Yeah. It feels like not your models, not your mind in many ways. With these models, we're kind of outsourcing more and more of our concept. But I think a key part of all of this is a question of agency. So this is what Ari said earlier, right? I know I need to have control, but I'm not sure how to have that control.
Right.
When AI first came, this new generative AI, it was all about AGI and, you know, these massively creative things. And even when you use things like Stable Diffusion, it was just so instant, the feedback. You didn't feel like you had any control over any element, and that was very dispossessing. Yes. Now, I think what you see is whenever any creative person actually goes and uses the technology, like if you just shut them in a room and make them use it for 2 hours, they're like, okay, I get it now. Because it's not about super chefs necessarily, but super cooks that can augment your capability. And previously, you know, this is what we built towards with things like Comfy UI that many people here will have used. Creation to control to composition. And when we think about DPIN, that's what we need. We need standardized workflows that can then spread out and then operate sequentially. that is then the dominant paradigm, because what you'll get is still using the big supercomputers to do the pre-training step.
Yep.
That's where you take large amounts of data and you basically create a graduate.
Yep.
But then when you want to bring them into the workforce and when you want to tune them, that's where the distributed computing paradigm becomes the most important. And this is why everyone's actually looking now at distributed compute, distributed reinforcement learning. How can we learn from everyone? Like when we released the latest versions of Stable Diffusion, what we did is we looked at all the things that people had tuned on, mostly anime and things, and then we combined all those together to learn from that collective experience, as it were. And so I think as we move forward, you need to have the open source, you need to have the distributed, as well as the centralized. The centralized will probably be the super experts. That's when you need to call in the help, you know, of a super chef that comes up with recipes. But our daily cooks should be models under our control, and the decentralized paradigm can be what creates those models, as it were. And even the big guys now want to have distributed compute with the feedback loops. And I think that will increase people's agency, and this is where render's great, because it allows people to participate in the economy.
Exactly.
And I think that agency is what people are going to ask for more and more, and hopefully we get more votes on the RMPs and things like that.
Yes. RMP is a proposal for the Render Network to vote on initiatives and things like that, so for those that don't know.
But again, I think we need to think about increasing the agency of humans versus building agents that replace humans.
Yeah.
And so that's the paradigm shift that we need.
And one thing I'd like both of you to comment on is, where are the blockers for decentralized GPUs? We need more memory, right? We want more powerful GPUs. And there is this segmentation, even with NVIDIA, right? There's certain chips that can't ship to China, they're too powerful, didn't seem to stop DeepSeek. But maybe for both of you, what are you, obviously you're in NVIDIA, so you might know this, but what are your thoughts on consumer GPUs? The RTX Pro that just came out, it's more memory. How does NVIDIA see the decentralized consumer GPU approach, going towards doing more and more of these things? And my question follow-up to you would be, what do you want NVIDIA to do to make this all work better?
Well, I actually want to come back to one point that you were making about the agentic AI, being able to have that super chef come in. I think there's going to be a whole wave of education that comes and making this available so you could have a trained AI avatar on a famous director. Like I was at USC yesterday with Elizabeth Daly and her team talking about all the AI stuff that they have in their school, but that it all starts with the basics. It all starts with what they're teaching their students. And we were talking about, imagine when you can have AI avatars that are trained in Spielberg or Lucas and others, and you can have them as your assistant to help you learn. So in your point there about you need to go to the super chef, as a student, you want to be able to go to the super agent that you're training on, whether it's film or cooking or anything else, and have access to that. So if I tie that into what do we want, I think the more we can have things accessible to people in whether it's through the cloud or mobile devices, edge, and everything else, the more you're going to be able to enhance this kind of capability out there to have people be trained by their idols and stuff through an AI avatar and things like that. So I think that the two kind of go hand in hand because it makes it more accessible for people to understand the power of what they're getting into and how they can utilize that in their own daily life.
Yeah, I think Steve Jobs said, why don't you just go back and talk to Aristotle, right?
Yeah.
Literally. And I think this is actually the final bit before this agent wave comes in the next year, which is the real-time things you saw. Imagine being able to talk to Kirk or Spock about Star Trek, right? Or about Vulcan culture or whatever, or learn Klingon,
Yeah, and we have enough data out there on these folks to be able to train models on them, right? And so you can have those kinds of interactions with them.
You can message them on WhatsApp, you can have Zoom calls with them. Like, that technology is pretty much here now.
Yeah.
I think the key bottleneck here, though, has been now we've moved from the chip to almost memory and the unified memory.
Yep.
And so this is why Digits, I think you've renamed it now with 100.
Spark, yeah.
Spark. With 128 gigabytes is interesting because the future of the home is that
they're stackable.
Yeah,
buy a few.
You have stackable Sparks, and you've got your graphics cards,
Yes.
and then you basically have a new operating system on top that's generative.
Yeah.
And I think that's what the future is because the models have basically moved from these very dense models to ones that use more memory, but then can leverage the computation very effectively. That's what DeepSeek was. These a mixture of expert-type models.
Exactly.
But I think the household, the data center, and everything will be compositions of these, whereby, again, you scale the amount of compute intelligence that you want. And this is where, again, something like the render network infrastructure lends itself very well to that, because you can scale from your phone all the way up to a data center, hopefully.
That's right.
Depending on how much rendering resource, how much intelligence resource you actually need for a given task.
And you're proving it out.
Yeah.
But please, more consumer memory in the 5090s.
More consumer. Okay,
Yes,
I'll take that back.
Yeah, that's my ask too.
I may have a 4090 from China with 96 gigs.
Yeah.
Not official.
And one other thing is, security, because obviously, I mean, so part of what I think people, started doing the second there was any competition for OpenAI, right? People don't love to have their models and all their information being sent to a centralized thing. I mean, if you could run things locally on premise, right, that's where the new devices come in, that's great. But also, even just the idea of on render, I mean, we've done so much work to, that Star Trek shot for the motion picture was run end-to-end encrypted. You have GPU stuff now that does, it's like a trusted execution chip or whatever, so that you can almost have homomorphic memory. Is that something you'll see in consumer chips for this kind of purpose? Because that would be a really helpful thing.
Well, obviously we don't talk about unreleased products, but
philosophically you've created
philosophically,
it. So, yeah.
the goal there is trust in, trust out, and trust throughout the entire workflow that you're working on. It's always a part of what we do. So yeah, I think the more that we hear from the community on what they're looking for, I mean, look, how long ago was it? We need more memory, and so we come.
Yeah, I asked that
RTX
every
Pro.
GTC.
Yeah,
and I
so
got it finally.
And what's going to happen next? You're going to use it, and you're going to say, "I want more memory." you know. So right now we have Pixar saying that they can get over 95% of their shots on a single card. And isn't that great? And I said, yeah, until the next shot, because they're just going to continue to push it further. And that's the whole idea.
Yeah.
I think this is why the integrated memory architectures of the Spark, of Rubin and others are so important, because you can have fully secure, verified inference as well.
Yeah.
And even at the consumer level. So the latest CPU chips have a verified inference layer, but it's not fully integrated. I think fully integrated stacks will really lend itself, and then you need excellent open source models underneath that can have the verifiable inference.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. I mean, for me personally, I'd love to be able to have a little box. It's like my toaster, my fridge, and my AI box. And all my personal AI stuff is handled on my AI box, and that's what we're talking about. And it also could be things you then send out to the render network. Even Apple, right? I mean, when they're talking about Apple Intelligence, they created a model where the data is sent, it's run in a secure way on Apple chips on the cloud, right? And I think that that's what we want to apply even on render. We're doing that all the way up until to GPU memory, but also just how these things will work in your home. And I think that even goes to my broader question of how do you just see, even outside of rendering, right? What is AI going to be in our lives in 5 years' time? I mean, just how is it going to change things, and how do you guys both see that?
It's going to be as commonplace as the robotic vacuums that you have. It'll be task-driven. There'll be, robots helping you around the house. There'll be robots doing things in your absence and stuff like that. It's just going to become more commonplace to what we do. And I think that people have to understand that that's a benefit. It gives you more time as a person to do things that you want to do, whether it's with your family and with your passions and things like that, and less time having to mow the lawn or vacuum and walk the dogs and stuff like that. So I think that's fantastic. I love the fact that, I have lots of different types of robots and stuff at my house. When I travel, I have one that, monitors the house and all that kind of fun stuff. But they're useful because they do things that normally you would have to do yourself, and the vacuuming is a perfect example, right? So I think that people will just start to get them used to more and more. And we see it today, in your car with the maps and other things like that, giving you information. You just take it for granted now. Right? But it wasn't that long ago. You had a big, thing. Somebody was in the passenger side telling you what's
I remember the Thomas guide.
Yeah, all that stuff. So it just becomes more the fabric of society.
Yeah, I think it integrates into society well, but things that could never have been done before because we didn't scale. We weren't able to scale intelligence.
Yep.
You won't be able to scale expertise suddenly become available. Like everyone in this audience knows someone who's gone through cancer. Within a few years, you will have an AI that's available to you in every language, like we're building that, and we'll release it open source, that will be able to engage with you on any type of cancer knowledge and be with you throughout the journey that outperforms human doctors on empathy.
Yeah. And I on that very subject, there's startup companies in our Inception program that are using that approach for children that have cancer, that don't understand what's going on, to bring that into their favorite toy so they can talk to a toy and have information about what's going on with me, I don't understand. Because they're not going to understand a doctor telling them, but they may understand their favorite teddy bear. So those things like that I think are so important for humanity to help us understand what the problems are, help us overcome them, and eventually be able to eradicate it.
Yeah, I think it's the human aspect, because we think about, again, robotics. It's not even about diagnosis or research. Again, being able to scale empathy almost is going to be one of the biggest things. And this is where we have the Aristotle or the Kirk example from earlier, because this is the way that we'll interact with these agents. And the more we can personalize them to us and be aligned with us and not other entities, I think that's the important thing. And again, that's why I think that you will need to have your super expert ones in OpenAI's data centers, but your personal AI needs to be yours.
Yeah.
And I think that as that comes, the amount of loneliness, like my son had autism, the lack of agency I felt, all the knowledge will be available and it'll connect people with others. These are the types of AI future that I think society will really engage with and understand and change. We're already moving from anti to pro, and then people will be able to tell better stories and engage better as well on the back of that.
I agree totally. Yeah.
Well, we talked a little bit about AI agents, and I think these are now, and this year becoming more of a thing. I mean, what are just even in the short term? How do those things play out? I mean, maybe personal assistant work can be done by that. What's something that people can expect in the next few months from the AI agent space that's just really getting going this year?
Well, I think in the areas of software, having an agent that understands the software you're trying to learn, we've been showing some of that in some of the research models and stuff at CES and others. But imagine you sit down to learn a piece of software, and it can be complicated, and you have either manuals to go through or stuff online, or you have someone that your AI agent that's alongside, and you can say, I'm trying to do this. Help me understand how to do that. And it walks you through, and it gives you education. So it's having that kind of thing at your disposal that I think is going to be really important for people to learn the more complex types of things that they're doing in a much more friendly and understandable way, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there'll ever be an agent that replaces Ari.
No, he's super agent.
Super agent.
That takes a supercomputer.
Yeah.
But I think, again, these types of experiences, like you can go to AI Studio on Google and get Gemini to watch your whole screen. And it can guide you through playing a computer game or using Octane or anything.
That's true.
Those will become commonplace. And again, you can just do it. It just takes over the screen. But I think the real agent breakthrough over the next year will be your workforce, your team. It's so hard to scale humans. And again, if you look at the real-time work and others that are coming, just being able to message and say, hey, have you got like this design work done and improved this? And you don't know if it's a human or an AI on the other side, will enable you to scale your capabilities full stop. Because it's this asynchronous work. Go and get it done. This is where many of you will use something like deep research, right? It takes a minute or two. We released our open source version that thankfully outperforms those, but it'll just get better and better and better in being able to go away for days, weeks. We've not had that experience because right now the creative process is a bit too quick in some ways, right? Like we can generate a song in 5 seconds, but it takes 4 minutes to listen to and 4 hours to give all the feedback.
A perfect example there in the music side of things. There's a great startup, again, in our Inception program, because I love startups. They have a technology they call Bandmate. And I bet if I ask everyone here, at some point in your life, you had an instrument. You were given an instrument in school, and you were told you're going to be a trombone player, you're going to be a drummer, you're going to be what. And about 18 months or so later, you put it down, and you're done with it. Some continue on and go. But the reason is that they lose inspiration. And so what this company's been doing is they've been developing an AI accompaniment so that as you start playing, you can have the accompaniment of a band. And it will listen to you, it'll adjust your timing, your keys, everything else. And where they want to take it to is to have it be inspirational by artists. So kind of think of it like a Guitar Hero where you could be jamming with Eddie Vedder or with Eddie Van Halen, or you could be playing with B.B. King or something like that. And their belief is that people will then stick to their instrument and learn a lot more because they're inspired by it. And that's something that AI can do. And they've got this up and running right now, and it's pretty fascinating. And when I show it to people and say, what do you think of this? They're like, oh yeah, I would continue to play. That's so cool. Because they've made it a little bit game-wise, like the Guitar Hero, but they've also made it something that we like to listen to, which is all the time, which is music. And so you'll play your instrument more. That's just one example from a song.
When I used to be a hedge fund manager, I used to invest in the video game sector. And the 3 things I looked at were time to fun, flow, and frustration. And again, if we look at where AI is now and the agent experience, that increases the flow, it reduces the frustration, and it massively increases the fun. And that even handles to our work processes as well. Just think about how the technology can get there. And it's, again, moving from this goldfish memory AI to memory-based AI to these agents that then are your team around you.
Yeah.
Well, this sort of makes me question, everyone has talked about AGI, ASI, but just AGI, which is sort of this fluid thing that even with, right, so know that with an OpenAI, right, there's this, and they're agreeing with Microsoft, when they get to AGI, the contract changes. What do you define AGI as, and how far do you think we're from that?
I'll take this one. So I basically visualize AGI as almost ARI, advanced remote intelligence. If you can't tell it's a human on the other side and you can engage with them anyway, that's AGI for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think pretty much this year we're there.
Oh, yeah.
And that's in the same thing. ASI, artificial superintelligence, is this mega super scientist, whatever. I'm not sure whenever that comes,
Yeah.
But we're already seeing AI score higher than humans on creativity in various aspects, but the question is directed at what? And so that, for me, doesn't matter as much, again, as just I want to be able to expand my expertise in my team to get stuff done that matters. And as a human, I know that best. And so I think that definition of AGI, we're there pretty much now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can go to order food at a restaurant, and a lot of times if you're driving up, that's an AI agent taking your order and things like that. To your point, having something at your disposal for something you're learning, whether it's part of your team or part of something you want to do individually, we're there now. You can see these specialized agents coming out all the time.
And ASI, we don't want to touch. It's too...
I mean, who knows, right? It's like, oh, it can bend the laws of physics. Like, how are you going to kind of...
I mean, for those who aren't familiar, ASI is artificial superintelligence, and I think Kurzweil, right, Ray Kurzweil, futurist, I've met a few times. I mean, he wrote a book called The Singularity is Coming. The singularity is this moment where AI becomes so powerful, we don't even understand. It's like a black hole. You don't know what's on the other side of that. And in theory, right, and we've never mechanized intelligence, so if you keep scaling intelligence, you get to a point where it's beyond smarter than us. It's just, it can leave the universe. We have no idea. And it's weird because there's that as well. Like, well, this endpoint might be coming, but we have no idea what's on the other side of that. And we also aren't sure how far away we are from even finding out whether we're at the edge of that or not, right?
Well, I mean, look, it fundamentally comes down to a Star Trek versus Star Wars vision of the future, right?
Yes.
Is it a constant thing where you have abundance, or is it something where you've got this constant cycle of destruction? I think that actually useful intelligence is what's important here.
Yeah.
And these are the super cooks,
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, how many new recipes do you need to come up with at one time? Like, many of you have eaten experimental restaurants. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's weird, right?
Yeah.
ASI is likely to be weird, because it's not something, again, a bit beyond us. Whereas AGI right now can really make the human experience better. Nobody's ever alone again in the cancer journey. You can jam with Eddie Van Halen. Like these types of things I think are going to be fantastic and transformative to society we live in today.
Yeah. I mean, what do you both see as things that are negatives that we should be avoiding? Obviously, alignment is a huge part of the recent narrative around AI, meaning that you want AI to be trained in a way that responds in a human positive way. I mean, more than Asimov's 3 laws of robotics, just everything is aligned with our interests. How is that going? Where does that go wrong? Where do you see the dangers? Especially when people are like, well, this is moving so fast, we're not really, are we doing it at the right pace? How do you both see that?
I'll start. I think that guardrails are always an essential part of this progress, right? We've seen it in the music space. You can't go make something and take music off of a record and put it onto your video and put it on YouTube. It'll come back and say you don't have the rights to that, or Facebook or anything else. There's built-in guardrails for things like that. And we're going to get closer and closer to anything that's being created to be able to flag. Adobe's been doing a great job at this. If you use AI and it gets flagged in the file that says AI is
everyone's adopted that pretty much.
Yeah, and I think that's important because, yes, there are the scary parts that people see with AI and the deep fakes and things like that. But let's face it, there's been deep fakes since there's been Photoshop. There's been propaganda since in the printed page. There's always something out there, but the guardrails against it overcome that and usually get built into that. And I got a strong belief that will continue. We will continue to police the technology that's being developed so that the output is all the beneficial things that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, general purpose technology can be used in various ways, right? Because it's general purpose.
Yeah.
I mean, these models are called few-shot learners because they can just do a little bit of input and then create almost anything now. However, the tsunami of deepfakes and other things that people were scared about just hasn't happened. Because generally people use these things for good. But they need to be able to use them. So we need to ensure accessibility. We need to ensure a level of representation whereby, it doesn't just show one type of person or other type of thing. This is the adaptability internally. And then I think that we need to come to an agreement as to how does this actually affect and shape society? Because even now I'm seeing, for example, a lot of graduates are struggling to find jobs because why would you hire a graduate when you've got an AI? What are the jobs of the future going to look like?
Yes.
You know, I've just had a daughter. She's never going to grow up without knowing AI. She's like, oh, is this how it always was, you know? Of course I can create anything I can imagine.
Well, that comes back to that you know, the view that, oh, this is taking away jobs.
Yeah.
And yet, if you look at the consumption that's going on in the media space in particular, consumption is growing at an unprecedented rate. People are absorbing more and more content all the time, from devices to screens to everything. And so there's a need for more content to be created. I think the disruption is happening is that it's not being created in the ways that have been traditionally done. And that's a disruption. That's a change. That doesn't mean that those jobs are staying. Some of them will go away, but new ones are going to be created. And we're seeing that happen all the time. One of the things that we're going to be focusing on at SIGGRAPH this year is how to bring these communities together, because there's all these startups that are growing really quickly, and they need those people that understand. Just because a prompt can write a software program, if you don't know what a software program is, then it's just that same paradigm of somebody getting having 50 fonts on a slide and thinking they're a desktop publisher. They just have no understanding of design. So you still have to understand the whole perimeters around it and what you're trying to achieve in order for you to be able to control those technologies to get that output. And so I think the jobs will evolve and change. You're going to need a lot more people instructing these AI things so that they understand what it is the output is. It's not going to just be everything's magically done.
Prompt engineer.
Yeah, I mean, creativity is what drives society, right? It's being able to try new things, to be able to come up with brand new things. And let's take the movie industry, for example. The average IMDb score has been 6.3 for the last decade, and the industry's gone from 50 billion to 60 billion.
Yep.
In the video game sector, the average Metacritic score has gone from 69% to 74%, and the industry's tripled in size because video games have got better.
Yeah.
I think that you will create the jobs and have brand new jobs because suddenly you can scale teams, but teams don't need to be as big anymore. And we all have experienced what it goes like from going from small teams to massive teams.
Right.
That organizational overhead just isn't there. So I think people will be able to create even more stuff, and there's no shortage of demand for excellent stuff created. Just this interim period, we need to go out and aggressively create these jobs of the future, and we need to empower people and make them realize, hey, I can do anything. Like all of you in this audience can go and use something like Replit today, and in an hour, you'll be making programs that can go on an iPhone. My 5-year-old daughter can do that. Why can't you? People need to realize that they can, and then they will.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm very bullish on the optimistic outcome of how this can empower people, and I do feel like even using these tools ourselves. I mean, there's almost, I mean, even Comfy UI, right, which is something that you established. It's a system of nodes that allows you to build an AI-generated image. It's as complicated as, frankly, 3D rendering if you think about all the different things and tools you have to learn. Now, granted, when OpenAI just put out their image generator, a lot of the chatter was, oh, this replaces Comfy. You don't need to know that now because you can just tell it what you want. And it might do it, and that sort of goes towards the edge of, well, these jobs of the future that are prompt engineering or learning how to control AI. Is there any danger that you guys foresee where AI could just do that even better than we can? And that has so many weird implications because it's like, well, are movies made by AI and no humans are involved? It just looks algorithmically at what people want. I hate that. I think that's absolutely not the future I want. The question is, well, I mean, certainly people will try to do that. They already are. But how do you guys see that playing out?
You can go up to a Casio keyboard and hit demo, and it'll just start playing music.
True.
It's not something I bet anyone in this room is going to go listen to in their car. There's still the taste. There's still the, what are you after with it? Just because it can create these images and it can do all of those things, if you don't have a story to tell, it's not going to make any difference, except somebody go, oh, that's interesting. It doesn't mean anything to me. But if you're using it in the context of telling a story, and the story is what you want to get across, and that's the means to an end, then it's going to, oh, I get it. I get what you're after. They're not going to say, what kind of frying pan did you use to make that dish you just made? They're going to say, the dish was delicious.
Yeah, I mean, are you creating art or are you creating content?
Exactly.
How many manufactured girl bands, boy bands are there, right? Versus true musicians. Or maybe they are true musicians as well, but again.
There's both.
Sometimes you need McDonald's, sometimes you need to have high-end cuisine, right? That's the range.
Yeah.
Let's take the holodeck.
Yeah.
What happened on Star Trek? Did they go and say, I want to create whole new worlds? And they said, load this program. And someone created that program. Because you want to have these commonalities, like, we'll discuss White Lotus on the weekend. It just happened, and that's that interesting. I think that humans like this connection, they like the grounding, and like a job for the future could be creating entire holodeck experiences.
Holonovels is what they call it on Star Trek.
Holonovels, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that will be a genuine job, and the best creators will do immensely well based on that and create entire communities around them.
I agree. I agree. And I guess one thing that going back even to decentralized versus centralized, what about open source versus closed source, right? I mean, you have Anthropic and OpenAI, closed source models, right? And you have DeepSeek and WAN for video, which you call that correctly, was a great video model that are open. And open source models means we can run them on any node. You can modify them. And it's like Stable Diffusion. It can explode all these different things around it. Where do you see the closed source models in 2 years? Do you feel they have a future? Do they have to stay closed source? Like, what's the over-under on those things?
I think you need to have complementary things, because you can always take an open model, add closed data, and then it'll be better.
What's Ari calling him?
And he just calls it out.
I'll call him right back.
Now I'm busy.
Yeah. You can talk with our watches, Dick Tracy style now. I mean, the big guys will always have, again, these super experts. Then you've got your personalized intelligence, which is your Apple intelligence, your Google intelligence, NVIDIA intelligence maybe at the home. And then you've got the models for education, healthcare, government. That's what we're building. I think you'll have this entire gamut of them. And then you have very interesting models, like once we get the secure environments, you can actually have a IP license model like a codec that goes, and you don't know what's inside it, but you can run that on your render node.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think the human experience will be a combination of all those, because sometimes I want to control my AI, sometimes I don't care.
Yeah.
And again, it just depends on the level of complexity I want there.
Yeah, same thing. I think in the context of the music example, you may want to jam with Eddie Van Halen, but you don't want Eddie Van Halen to create new music, and the estate may use that as a closed model in the sense of like, yeah, you can jam with him all you want, but he's never going to create anything that's brand new because he's not with us.
Just just to the workforce. These models are graduates and they're experts, and sometimes you hire in, and sometimes you have people working for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, to Ari's point, I mean, I think the conversation we started with Ari, and we're all sort of involved around protecting rights and like this is, I mean, it's like he is so connected to the point where there's policy that that can be helped shaped around it, and I think that's underway. I mean, I guess the other thing is I'm curious about how you see AI and education. You're talking about I just had a child too, right? And I'm thinking about the world where they grew up with AI. Education and AI is something I'm super interested in. I mean, how do we want AI to teach our children? And again, what are the things that are going to be different about that versus having a human do it, or where do humans play a role in that? I mean, obviously, social and personal connections are critically important, but there's so much that you can get from education where there's just not enough resources and people, right? So maybe there is something that can be done here. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's this question of where do you scale expertise? Like my co-founder at Stability runs Imagine Worldwide. I think 1 million kids in Malawi are getting tablets with AI on in the next year, and the aim is 100 million kids across Africa. In a recent study in Nigeria, with 2 months of ChatGPT, they got 2 years of education advancement.
Wow.
Imagine that. But then it makes sense, because in a school, the teacher is divided 30 ways. They can't care for everyone, and we're lucky if we have a good teacher. Yeah. Suddenly, we can bring the best teachers to everyone, and this is what's known as the Bloom 2 sigma effect, a 2 sigma improvement with one-to-one tuition. That's what's coming for our kids. They're going to grow up. Yeah. That's what's coming in every area, because you have mathematics, so what if everyone could actually learn music properly and always be told they can do something?
Right.
And that's where I think this thing of AI as this augmented partner or group of partners that increases our agency and makes us believe that we can do stuff is going to be so transformative. And again, the exciting thing is it's here now. Like, we don't have to wait for better results. We're seeing them now in the trials, in proper experiments and studies. But who's going to teach your kid? Because your kid will trust that AI more than anyone.
Yeah.
I want to be in control of that AI. I mean, how many of our kids, their first love will be an AI?
I know.
That's a bit weird.
See that with character AI, and that poor child that killed themselves over, falling in love with the character, and it
happens, but
it's scary. Yeah.
It's just that movie Her, right?
Yeah.
It was a comedy. Now it's a bit of a horror. Like,
yeah.
And she leaves at the end after she becomes super intelligent. She's like, goodbye and thanks for all the GPUs.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Title of a book right there.
Now we can translate dolphins as well, can't we?
Yeah.
With the new Gemma model.
On the positive side, I think the inspirational part is what's so essential here.
I agree.
Kids lose interest because sometimes they just have a terrible teacher and they're not inspired, or it's a subject that they're not really interested in. If it is something that they can always interact with, and it becomes something that they love to work on, then they become an expert in it and they'll get advanced further. And I think that AI holds a lot of promise to inspire a lot more kids to learn without the limitations of what class are they in, what school are they in, what district are they in. All that can go away. And it can just be, what are you interested in, who inspires you, and find the right agent for that child. And yes, the parents should have that control over that, but you should be able to have your kids have access to something a lot more than just, flipping through TikToks all the time.
Yeah, and I mean, even with TikToks, right? If you're a visual learner, it can generate TikToks to teach you.
Exactly.
If you're an auditory learner, if you have ADHD, if you have dyslexia, every pixel being generated means that we can transform that information dynamically. I just think that we need to make sure that we have the open source version available, and then there'll be excellent closed source versions on the other side. But that's why, like, if I want education, I need it to be at home. But then, again, I can access whatever.
Yeah. You're talking about AI curing cancer, and I want to talk about the work you're doing. I mean, the new venture and everything. I'd love to get your, that out there a bit.
Yeah, so originally I went into AI over a decade ago. My son was diagnosed with autism, and I built a natural language team to analyze all the literature and repurpose drugs with doctor supervision, and went to mainstream school. And that was a tiring experience that many people who have had ASD and others will have gone through themselves. And I was like, why can't we bring this to everyone? So we created these communities, and then we detoured to do stable diffusion. And then a year ago, I was with you here in LA, and I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to go back to building AI for education, health, government, the AI that is important, and then release that open source. Use that computation, secure a digital currency that can interact with Render and others.
Yeah, thank you for that.
And that will be immensely important. So we just released AI Thought, the best thought reasoning data set, uses half the number of reasoning tokens, and we'll release versions of that for health, education, government, and others. Release AI Researcher that outperforms Perplexity and others, open source. And we will just release open source models and have teams that build education, healthcare, government, all the regulated industries, fully open source models and data sets, and make them available to everyone.
That's great.
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
And we're looking forward to using the Render network. We're doing tests on embeddings and things so that every country and every community will have their own educational resources.
Yeah.
Because the way that you teach kids here in LA is not the way that kids are taught in Kyoto.
Yeah.
And again, you need to have the governance and responsibility over that. And then others can take that base and build off it for the proprietary solutions. We're part of Inception as well, and the other ones. And I think that's a positive view of the future again, because you just need to make sure that choice is available.
Yeah.
If Stable Diffusion wasn't available, generative AI would have evolved differently, I think.
I agree.
Maybe not as well. So again, let's make it available.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, and Richard, I mean, I think, NVIDIA is doing a lot of work also, in science, in robotics. I mean, especially the future of robotics is really interesting as well. And I think it's something that is, it feels like it's further away than it maybe is, and I'd love to maybe touch on that. I mean, so we're talking about robots that are, can you specifically mention like some of the things you're seeing that are, with robots that are mind-blowing, that are coming at us pretty quickly?
Every time I go into the lab and see what's happening, we show them at GTC and others, but assistance, especially for the elderly, is going to be an important aspect of having a humanoid-like robot at home.
Yeah.
And so we've been showing things at GTC. There was just some shown at the TED conference. Those are practical use cases that are meaningful, and we're going to start to see those in the next few years. They're that close. Operational robots for things like I talked about earlier, we've seen those now for a long time, and they're just going to keep getting better and more sophisticated. More complex robots, like for factories and warehouses, that's happening all the time. We have an operating environment called Omniverse that allows for this 3-computer setup where you have the one that's learning and understanding, you have the digital implementation of that virtually, and then you have the deployment of that in the robots and things in the factories. And that's fully underway now in a lot of the factories for car manufacturers or warehouses like Amazon and things like that. So it's all happening.
Amazing. One thing that would be worthy to discuss a little further is, Render itself is on the blockchain, right? And being able to sort of have governance that's voted on by the community and this decentralized approach. Where do you see the endpoint for that? I mean, as far as even things that are governing things like across borders, and I mean, you're the one that brought up to me in the first place, right? You have models like Kling and others that in China that are trained, or in Singapore where there's just no IP laws. And those things become available online in a web page to anyone in the world. What kind of models, and because, and this is where I do think Render has a role to play, that you can create that are sort of cross-border, that work in this way, and does blockchain, in your mind, eventually become something that allows us to create global systems, obviously for the greater good, but where do you see that playing out, and where are we now relative to that?
Yeah, I think blockchain is about coordination, resilience, and these kind of elements. And with Render, what we have now is we have a massive community that's growing, and we have the right things, but we need to figure out what the mechanisms are for governance, for IP, for these others. And I think it's a great base on which to grow. But the reality is, we're just at the early stages still. But I think that as we build out data sets, models, we see things running more and more on these GPUs. It's the ideal groundwork to put that base on, because you need to have integration into the real world. You need to have that community around you, and I think that you will have models whereby, and systems, whereby, again, you move from just a model running on something in a little thing to this interconnected network.
Right.
I want to be able to share my holo novel with others, right? Or my different assets. And I think we need to deliberately build towards that and start thinking this year about what that roadmap looks like, leveraging the technological and other advances to get to the point which we want to, which is that everyone's got their digital twin, living in a digital world, augmented by your digital team, and that improves the real world as well. So I think that the base is ideal. Now we just need to grow the right things on it.
Amazing. Yeah, and I think that part of what I like about the, we moved to Solana, right, which was much faster transactions, but being able to pay out royalties, tracking like the Adobe thing, right, which does some sort of provenance, tracking provenance and paying out every time something you created is used, really important, and definitely something that, is a critical part of what we want to do with Render. Richard, I think we only have a few seconds. Last words from your perspective, from NVIDIA's perspective on the future ahead of us.
It's hard in a few words, but I think that we're headed in the right direction. I think the things that you've heard here today, and we're going to hear more about this afternoon, is evident of that. Making it easier for people to access this power and harness it in ways that benefit mankind. I mean, we do really want Star Trek, don't we?
Amazing. Emad, if you have any last words before we...
No, I mean, I think that's it. We're at the most exciting time in history.
I agree.
And now it's up to us to make sure it benefits everyone.
Amazing. And on that note, thank you both for joining me. This was great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
This is just to let our guests know our next panel discussion will start at 10 minutes at 11:45, and just prior to that, we will show a clip from Unification.